Okay, welcome to a class on subjunctive and conjunctions. This is more about old-fashioned English, if I'm honest, but some people are interested in such things, in old-fashioned English. And of course, we've already studied subjunctive, which many argue has been disappearing from British English, certainly, and I would certainly say that. I think we normally use should instead of subjunctive. Instead of saying, if that be the case, we say, if that should be the case. Instead of saying, who is safe if Justine be convicted, we say, who is safe if Justine should be convicted. And you can see this. In England, we've been doing this for hundreds of years. You can see it in really old books. But I must admit, the subjunctive is found in a lot of different places. And if you don't know about it, you might get confused by sentences like that. And rightly so. You know, I understand exactly why you'd be confused by that. And so it's worth knowing about, and it's worth knowing perhaps which conjunctions you very often see it with in old-fashioned English. So in the Bible, you very often see this subjunctive. You very often see lest in subjunctive, and though in subjunctive, and until, and if, and whether, and subjunctive. So these are all conjunctions, subordinating conjunctions, that you see being used with subjunctive. Now, I'm not suggesting that you always should use subjunctive with all of these. However, I mean, you do want to always use it with that one. It's a very old-fashioned word, but do use subjunctive with that one. It seems to really demand subjunctive. And I think it's a good idea to say if I were rather than if I was, which is also subjunctive, yeah? If I were a rich man, if I were in your shoes. Very few native speakers say if I was in your shoes, very few. And that's why it's worth using after if. So be aware that we use past subjunctive, the were instead of the was, after if. But if you look at old literature, you actually see the present subjunctive, if he be, if she be, being very often used in first conditional, yeah, which is a real conditional. So that might surprise you, because often people say that subjunctive is about hypotheticals, and it is. But it used to be used differently, and we used to use it in first conditional as well, it seems to me. And so we get things like this. If that be the case, yeah, that's first conditional really, and most people nowadays would say if that is the case. But you will often see if that be the case, then blah, 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 blah. Yeah, if that be the case, then we won't go on holiday. Yeah, if that is the case, it's first conditional, but we're using this that be. And so it's worth knowing about. It's old-fashioned. I'm not saying that you should do this instead of the standard first conditional sentence. I'm not saying that at all. But I want you to be aware of it, because if you're watching Shakespeare in the theatre, or if you're reading Edgar Allan Poe or something like that, or Frankenstein, which is where the next one comes from, then you will see subjunctive. And if you are a writer, you can use subjunctive to give a sentence or a phrase a very old-fashioned feel. Yeah, and so I know The Lord of the Rings very often has subjunctive, and I think it gives it that old, archaic, biblical feel, yeah? And certainly the Bible has a lot of subjunctive. So here's the next one from Frankenstein. Who is safe if Justine be convicted of a crime? So you see this, if Justine be convicted, rather than who is safe if Justine is convicted of a crime. Yeah, that's what it would be in indicative in the normal way of doing it. But who is safe if Justine be convicted of the crime? Just like that be, Justine be. It's there, yeah, and so you will find this in old literature, and yes, it sounds archaic, but it does have a nice, I mean, sometimes archaic things do sound nice. The next one's from Carl Jung, who wasn't a big fan of addiction. He understood that every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether, so now we're not just looking at the if, we're also looking at the whether. And it's only when you're saying whether X or Y, when you've got two options, because that's not always the case. You know, if you say something like this, I don't know whether I will come to the party. or not. It's only when you say the or not that you've got two options. But notice we've got three options here. Whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism. Yeah, so Jung's saying that all addictions are bad. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism. Yeah, so it doesn't matter if it's a chemical or another form of addiction, which is being addicted to being an idealist, and so being in some way addicted to the ideal. Yeah, it's still an addiction. That's what Jung is saying.